This is the sound of someone losing the plot, making out that they're okay when they're not. You're going to like it, but not a lot. On the NOTCAST, goes like this. It is number 458. It is Thursday, the 4th of September, 2025. Number 458 in an irregular series of a middle-aged man talking about records he likes, loves, or merely owns. And today I'm talking about Pulp's 7th studio album. This is hardcore, a difficult meal to swallow, and of course the one of many Britpop legacy hangover releases. Albums like Be Here Now, Head Music, This Is Hardcore, Blur's 13. They're all the sounds of bands looking into the abyss and finding that the abyss is not only staring back, it's asking them to come in for a drink. And this is an unusual record. First and foremost, of course, it is the sound of Britpop dying on its arse. Because people are very reductive and they kind of reduce bands down to a set of simple ciphers. Everyone's got a role. So you think about James Bond, okay? It's a guy in a suit and it's a tux. He's got a gun. He sleeps with people and kills them. Not always necessarily in that order. And sometimes they're the same person, for example, as in some of the James Bond films. Britpop, again, kind of had its moment in the sun. In probably 95, 96, Labour got elected in May 1997, and suddenly there was this wave of optimism that didn't last very long at all. And there was a wave of optimism in the 90s that started at the moment David Hasselhoff stood on the top of the Berlin Wall and sang that he was looking for freedom, until around about 1:45 p.m. UK time on September the 11th, 2001, when it was plainly apparent that there was a coordinated terrorist attack. After that, everything started to fade, but Britpop kind of faded away sooner. I never liked the phrase Britpop because it implied that somehow all of this stuff was British pop music, and it isn't, because if you think about it from very strict terms, girls are allowed a Britpop because they're British and they're pop music. The Spice Girls were. Pulp, Suede, Blur, Oasis, Supergrass? No, absolutely not. Once indie alternative bands that then had suddenly made Simply Red, thank God, redundant and outdated. And then, of course, that's what happened next. So, yeah, Britpop died when Princess Diana died in a car crash in 1997. August 31st, 1997. That was it. The end. Kaput. Over. Finished, I think. Or whatever the date was. Maybe it was the 30th of August. But from that point onwards, Britpop was dead. And the Queen of Britain, the People's Princess, as Tony Blair had it, was also dead. And you suddenly you're past the Terminator. You go, there was before and there was after. And it could never be the same again afterwards. That idea, that, you know, the idealism, the British exceptionalism that we had, and suddenly it was like, yeah, it's over. That, and of course the load of that helped make Be Here Now. This Is Hardcore is the sound of a hangover, as obviously Jarvis sang on The Fear, the opening track. You're going to like it, but not a lot. This was the sound of what happened after the night before became the morning after. The night when, after you'd realised, as Jarvis sang on Underwear, if fashion is your trade, then you're naked. I guess that must mean that you're unemployed. The idea that you've got down to it, the dirty nitty gritty, as he said about the song Underwear, and there's nowhere else to go. This Is Hardcore is what happens afterwards. And it takes its title and its art somewhat controversially from hardcore pornography, something which in the late 90s became more readily accessible in more repressed countries thanks to the growth of a thing called the internet, and the idea that there was a vision or something that you could achieve that perhaps you could only see when one of the naughty school kids sneaked back some grotty mags from Spain on his holidays and then sold them to you or rented them to you at school. I went to an all-boys school. Stuff like that happened. And then suddenly, you were able to access that kind of stuff. You were able to see a different kind of reality. The idea that once you airbrush away absolutely everything else and you take away, all the artifice, and you look at that is what it really is, what William Burroughs called the naked lunch moment, where you really see that the meat on the end of the fork is in fact an animal, a dead animal that has been cooked to perfection. And when I talk like that, I probably should become a vegetarian, but I'm not. So sorry. Besides which, if I was, I probably would have told you by now, wouldn't I? But I'm not. This is Hardcore is the sound of a band falling apart and remaking itself with the idea of going, well, once you've achieved fame, success, money, what do you do? Where do you go? Because if that was the thing you were chasing, like Heath Ledger said in The Dark Knight, is that, if you're the dog chasing the car and then you catch the car, what are you going to do? That is what this album is. It's the sound of what happens next. And it was preceded by the first chink in the band's armour on 2 counts, actually. The first one is this single, Help the Aged, released on the 10th of August 1997. As you can see, very quickly, Specs Jarv is back, which means that the sexy Jarvis that you had from the past couple of albums, who didn't wear his glasses, has now kind of taken a step back and become a little bit more spexy, not sexy. That's a terrible pun. I wish I'd never said it. But we are where we are. It is where it is. And these are what they are. So that was where we were. He went into the studio, the band went into the studio with Russell to record new material. And the first track that they recorded was Cocaine Socialism, a song that was never actually released in its final and definitive mix until 2006, with the release of the expanded version of This Is Hardcore, which came with a second CD of B-sides and unreleased, well, mostly unreleased studio material anyway. The track Cocaine Socialism was recorded alongside Help the Aged in late 1996, but the sessions were abandoned, as Jarvis says in the sleeve notes for this version. It didn't feel right when he was recording it. Something was wrong. He didn't have the confidence, he didn't have the vision. Maybe he didn't believe what he was singing. And Cocaine Socialism, by the way, it started off live as a track called Northern Soul in 1996, and the lyrics were rewritten following the Labour win about what people were calling cocaine socialism. And they think about, well, perhaps if your politics are more liberal, more left-wing, more tree-huggy hippie crap, as some people might put it, and suddenly you get to the point where, your guys are in power, you suddenly find that, one, they're held to an impossible moral standard that nobody can have, and two, they're accused of the politics of envy and hypocrisy whenever they do anything. Whereas, obviously, the conservatives could often just go, well, I'm a conservative. That's what conservatives do. And, Labour claiming to care about people is suddenly shown to be a complete crock of something or other. Cocaine Socialism wasn't recorded. It was abandoned in 1996. And Jarvis then spent 2 weeks in a New York hotel around about New Year 1996 to 1997, working alone, having effectively a nervous breakdown, somewhat getting agoraphobia, scribbling furiously, writing songs. And Russell left the band. Russell left the band for reasons that are detailed in his book Freak Out the Squares, that he felt that having achieved everything that the band had intended to do, it was then playing to the gallery to an extent to sing Common People when you were then actually a successful arena-filling band. The band became, I think, less glamorous and arty. They became more low-key in a lot of what they did when Russell left, because Russell brought the weird in a way that perhaps you hadn't really realised until he wasn't in the band anymore. And it was just a situation where the band changed. Things changed. Every band has what it's called, as Neil Tennant says, the imperial phase, the phase where they're bulletproof. And suddenly something happens and you go, I'm not there anymore. Some bands have a number of imperial phases. U2's had it in the 80s, the 90s, the noughties. Pet Shop Boys had it up to the release of Domino Dancing, and they suddenly went from having 3 number 1 singles in a year to suddenly peaking at number 9. Help the Aged was the start of the end for the band in terms of their imperial phase. They were no longer bulletproof. It got to number 8 in the charts. Russell disliked it. He wanted to block its release. And Jarvis, being 34, was starting to age in public. And of course, being a relatively late starter at 33, the glasses were a move away from being seen as purely a sex symbol. That lanky, northern, funny, witty guy that was a lady killer or whatever, and suddenly started being basically what he was, which was a bit of a nerd who got successful. And as an owner of a pair of glasses, I'm just going to point out you can change your identity by putting on a pair of glasses, because I am Superman, and lo and behold, I'm now Clark Kent, and no one can ever tell the difference. No one can ever tell that you're not the same person, or can they? Help the Aged is an interesting song. It's not what you would expect to be the first single from a follow-up to Different Class. It lacks all of the grandeur, the speed, the glamour, the fortune, the fame of that. It doesn't pound along at 1,000 miles an hour. It doesn't have this huge sweeping chorus like Do You Remember the First Time or Common People. It's not got that dinky little keyboard sound that sounds suspiciously like a future that never quite happens. Help the Aged is the sound of a band staring in the mirror first thing in the morning after a heavy night with relaxed muscle. And it's a great song, but it's not the lead track from an album. And actually, This Is Hardcore as an album really lacks killer hits. There's not one track which would be, their trash, their Wonderwall, their, all right. And none of that. It is all basically second singles from the album, or third singles from the album. If you want to think about it in Suede terms, for example, This Is Hardcore is an album that has 4 lazies, 4 film stars, 4 Saturday nights on it, as opposed to 4 trashes, 4 beautiful ones, 4 drowners, 4 metal mickeys, 4 animal nitrates, 4 so youngs. It's about that. And when in these days, or more correctly in those days, if you wanted to experience an album, you had to buy it, you had to own it, you had to plonk down your $10.99 for it on CD from our price, and hope that the one song which you'd heard from the album so far reflected the rest of everything else that was going on in it. So Help the Aged didn't exactly set its stall out particularly widely, and it just didn't work, really. It's a song about growing old and growing decrepit, and one day they'll be in a home. And yes, it's funny and it's witty and it's a great song, but it's not lead single from an album territory. It is not You Shook Me All Night Long. It is not Sweet Child of Mine or You Could Be Mine or Enter Sandman. It is something very different. It's just not. And in those days, a killer first single was the thing that you needed to really get people on board. This Is Hardcore got to number 1 in the UK charts when it was released. And it was eventually released around about April 1998. But it got to number 1, but it sold 52,000 in week 1. Different Class sold 133,000 in week 1. So it was less than half. And as an album, it plays like a treaty or a discussion about the long, slow fade, about the managed decline, a midlife crisis. This is the sound of a hangover on vinyl. It's possibly one of the wooziest albums I've ever heard. It's also an album that my brother really, really disliked when it came out. But to me, I grasped it completely and immediately. It was an album that to me, it was the sound of a depressive episode. It was the sound of a realization. It was the sound of waking up in the morning and not really knowing why you've woken up. Or as David Gilmour and Pink Floyd's Sound of Sorrow, waking facing the morning with no reason for waking. You woke up because that's what happened, and there was really very little more to it than that. It was a midlife crisis, almost the sound of effectively a Britpop surrender, a passing of the baton on and going, we are now, has-beens. Not in a bad way, by the way, but more in a recognition that you can't replicate lightning in a bottle. It can't get it to strike twice. That's just what it is. It was not necessarily a resignation or an abdication, but it was a recognition that, as Jarvis once said, the best time to leave a party is always 5 minutes before more correctly, 5 minutes before you realise you should have left 5 minutes ago. And it is the sound of someone who realised they should have left 5 minutes ago. Jarvis said in 2004, I had attained an ambition in life and found it wasn't all cracked up to be. And the idea of the band playing in a room together, the five of them, and making the songs started to fracture at this point, especially around about the time that Jarvis was writing songs on his own on a Porter studio in a hotel in New York near Times Square in New Year's Eve 1996. Tracks used to get built up and become more exciting, but not this time, is what Nick Banks said in his book, I'm with Pulp, Are You? I think that's what it's called. And it was also described as different, but not as good. It's the sound of depression, a quarter or a third life crisis. People have the idea that you have the half-life crisis where you're about 48 and you shave your head, get tattoos and all that type of stuff. Well, I've done one of those anyway, at least. Possibly two, who knows? But I haven't had the midlife crisis. The other part of it, of course, is sometimes you get a quarter-life crisis, the idea of when you get to 25 or 33 and you go, who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? What is the purpose? Because as obviously as in Common People was sung, there's nothing left to do but drink and dance and screw. And then suddenly you get to the point where you're in the next morning and you're going, I don't really know what this is all about. There was a metaphor in the album around childhood ambitions, about achieving what you always thought you wanted to achieve, and then suddenly finding that sex, fame was real, but not fun. Second single from the album, by the way, and I will get to the B-sides of Help the Ages, but I'll do it in a bit. Second single from the album is the title track, This Is Hardcore. One of the most expensive videos, I think, made outside of the domain of Michael Jackson. And the video for This Is Hardcore cost £1 million. Can you believe that? These days, bands like Suede make an album for £50,000. In those days, pardon me, you'd get £1 million just to make a video. And let's be honest, who really remembers the video to This Is Hardcore anyway? It looks like a James Bond title sequence, and it's not quite so good. A song is very difficult, I think, to listen to. It's built upon a sample from a classical track, the name of which I should have written down, but I didn't. It's very reminiscent, by the way, of Radiohead's Paranoid Android. Stopping, starting, lots of time changes, lots of weird and abrupt signatures and unusual kind of transitions between verse, chorus, bridge and so on. And the main kind of element of it, and according to the sleeve, which I really hope is written down on here, it's a sample of Bolero on the Moon Rocks, written by Peter Thomas and recorded by the Peter Thomas Sound Orchestra, which is one of the big kind of things for it. But it's also, by the way, if you're a drummer, This Is Hardcore is a nightmare to play live because it works off the sample, and that means you're on a click track. And if you're a drummer, you know that click tracks aren't always particularly easy to play to. Nonetheless, This Is Hardcore seemed like almost a doubling down, a repeat of the previous uncommercial approach from Help the Aged. Lyrically, it is, put bluntly, dark as heck, and it's about single mothers and sex and hardcore pornography, and it's got that filthy line about that goes in there and then that goes in there and that goes in there and then it's over, and what exactly do you do for an encore? A line that would come back to haunt Pulp in the nicest possible sense of the words when they reformed in 2011 and 2023. But there's a kind of an idea that sits at the heart of the lyrics to the song, and that is about, and this is quite dark as a subject matter, is the moment where somebody goes dead behind the eyes, the moment where they've achieved everything they've wanted, but they realise they've traded a part of their integrity, a part of their soul, to achieve it. And they thought, well, I'll do the thing, I'll compromise by bits, step by step. I'll compromise who I am, what I believe in, my integrity, my dignity, etc. And then all of a sudden, they're doing some quite undignified things, and the only thing they're getting in exchange for it is money, which can on itself, take away a number of problems, but you then trade it for something else. It was a metaphor, I think, for life and for fame and for entertainment. The idea of having lost the thing that made you special and unique in the first place. Jarvis said, I wanted to redraw the boundaries, and Mark Webber added, Jarvis was overriding other people's opinions. So Stockton's going, no, this is my band, I'm the singer, I'm the person that's on the sleeve, I'm the guy that gets stopped, so therefore it's not, I get to make the decisions. And there was a power imbalance, I think, whereas the band seemed, I think, more more diplomatic and more democratic around about the time of His and Hers and Different Class. By the time we got to This Is Hardcore, it was more people operating to kind of help achieve a wider ambition or a wider vision. So effectively, if you could kind of rank the people in the band by the influence they had in them, Jarvis would be number one, Steve would be number two, Nick and Candida having been the longest tenured. Outside of that would probably be 3 and 4, and then Mark Webber would be 5, and Russell obviously had left, so you didn't necessarily get that counterpoint around there. And This Is Hardcore got to number 12 in the UK pop charts, and that's not exactly a surprise. It was hoping, or more correctly, I think the record label were hoping that it would get to number 2 or number 1, and it would push the band back up and Help the Aged would be seen as perhaps a little kind of just a blip on the trajectory. But no, This Is Hardcore got 5 places lower in the charts, and it showed that this wasn't a blip. This was really happening. And I struggled with the song, and I still feel a little bit uncomfortable with the song, because to me it's very graphic. And yeah, if you like horror movies and stuff, there's a degree of, gore and body horror and things like that. And horror and porn are very similar in so much as they both deal with kind of quite abrupt, quite brutal physicality. And This Is Hardcore was a difficult album, because not only that, there was also a kind of an undercurrent that you could see in the title track and a number of other things, where it was the idea of Jarvis was effectively selling his image for money. And then it's a short gap to the track We Are All Prostitutes, isn't it? The idea that everyone's got a job. We sell ourselves in some way. We sell our body, our time, our mental acuity, in exchange for money so that we can survive. That's how capitalism works, bitches. It's not exactly difficult to grasp. This Is Hardcore was that kind of realisation that even the most outsidery of outsiders, and at one point Pulp had less commercial appeal than felt or denim, for example. At one point, then suddenly that became co-opted as well, and outsiderdom became just another product which was being sold and advertised for you. And then that's kind of reflected in the fairly graphic cover of the album, something I haven't felt necessarily comfortable with. So I'm going to talk about the cover of the album, because that is something you've been looking at for quite some time. Firstly, the Malaysian cassette of This Is Hardcore has a poorly superimposed yellow cardigan over the model, which I think is actually a much better idea. The second thing is it was designed by Peter Saville. Peter Saville obviously doing hyper-stylized covers for Suede at around about the same time, things like Film Star, etc. coming up. He was also responsible for New Order, Joy Division, a lot of factory records, a very keen visual eye, a great graphic designer. But what was happening here is he was moving into and being inspired by the work of a photographer called, I think, John Currin, who had hyper-stylized figurines, humans effectively posed like action men and women and Barbies, using paintings of female frames, the idea of an image defining what it is, the inherent sexist nature of the male gaze, reducing people down to body parts. That goes in there, and that goes in there, and then that goes in there, and then it's over. Oh yeah, all that type of stuff. It was meant to be a commentary, I think, upon the lechery of the male gaze, but also the lechery of porn as a whole, and kind of hyper-stylized lifestyle stuff. So you can see, like, the insert there, I don't know who that guy is, but clearly he's a model who's designed to look a certain way. And then you kind of look at the inner sleeves for the album, for example. I have no idea what I'm looking at here. And again, it's kind of representations of a hyper-stylized, hyper-real version of reality, where you kind of go, actually, this isn't not pleasant, this is not particularly dignified. It's kind of reducing something to its component parts, hands, face, body, boobs, etc., all that type of stuff. And you could say that if you're being very, very charitable about This Is Hardcore, that artwork was designed to represent the way in which we are all kind of compartmentalized and reduced down to component parts. But I think that's a bit of a leap, because it wasn't fully successful in articulating that in the way in which it should have been. Personally, I would have much preferred a cover which was hyper stylized but represented the member of the band or the members of the band in some form as being similar to kind of fashion models in something like a Marks and Spencer's catalogue. I think that would have been funnier, and I think that would have been more effective in telling the story. It also would have been a bit ridiculous, and the right to be ridiculous is something that Bono holds dear, of course. The parody can become real, and at this point the parody was so subtle and the commentary was so subtle, it effectively was massively overlooked. And I remember at the time that this album, the bus stop posters came out, people were spray painting "This is sexist" over it and obliterating parts of the image. It was a deliberately vague, threatening image that wasn't successful and didn't communicate, I think, the aims of the period, or, to use a dreadful word, the campaign. And that meant that actually I don't, even though This Is Hardcore is probably one of my favourite Pulp albums, I hate the cover to this album. I really, really do. I've never found an image from that period that to me feels accurate and representative of what the whole ethos of that period of the band's history actually is. So, going into the album itself, it's only taken me 25 minutes to get to the album. I've only talked about 2 singles on the cover. It opens with The Fear. The Fear is one of my very, very favourite Pulp songs of all time. The Fear is, I originally had the working title of Frightened. And by the way, there is a mix of The Fear on one of the CD singles. Let me quickly check which one it is. Yes, it is, I think, Party Hard, because I haven't found that yet. Features the complete and utter breakdown version, by the way, of The Fear. So there are 2 mixes of The Fear that are around. There's the LP mix and the version, the extended version that's on here, and the extended version on the CD single of Party Hard. Again, not chart eligible because it was over 20 minutes in length. Is, in my opinion, the definitive take of the song. It features a second guitar solo. But it's a song about what happens when you have social anxiety and the fear, the idea of going, well, is this who I am? Is this what it is? This is the sound of someone losing the plot, making out that they're okay. When they're not, you're going to like it, but not a lot. Here comes the fear again. And it's, as a song, it's a fabulous song. I've seen Pulp play it a couple of times. They opened the tour in 1998 with it, which I thought was wonderful and astute, but it also has one of my favourite lines ever in any song, which is "Some kind of life with the edges taken off." When you're no longer searching for beauty or love, but just some kind of life with the edges taken off. And as we know, social anxiety, depression, all of the things which run through this album like a stick of rock are often driven by the fact that life is unnecessarily harsh and difficult, harsher than it needs to be. And you can look at the structure and composition of society and you can go, well, actually, and I don't want to sound too conspiracy theorist about this, but it serves the purposes of the status quo to have the population fighting against and amongst each other about things like trans rights and immigration rights, because it takes our eyes and our energies off the ball of where the real cause of our difficulties in life are, which is the hyper rich and tax evaders and people like Nigel Farage that are snake oil salesmen who are trying to sell us a reality that obviously can never ever happen. Because remember, Nigel Farage said to us the problem was Europe. We left Europe. Oh no, now the problem is the immigrants. When they solve the immigrants, go, well, what's the next problem going to be? It's probably going to be the gays and the trans people. Then it's going to be people who wear glasses. Then it's going to be people with beards. Then it's going to be people that don't like football. And then all of a sudden we'll be dealing with revolution and riots in the streets. Oh, hang on, we've already got riots. Okay, so that is, my view, really. And when you're no longer searching for beauty or love, but just some kind of life with the edges taken off, and you just want to just be able to live without having to worry on a very constant basis about money, food, health, transport, fucked up families, whatever it is that you're worried about. One of my very, very favourite Pulp songs. And it's followed by what became the 4th single from the album. You've already seen a little sneak preview of it. It's called Party Hard. Party Hard, the 4th single from the album, got to the grand old number of 29 in the charts. For one reason, which is that CD2 was too long and it wasn't chart eligible. And CD2, if I recall correctly, contained 3 remixes of Party Hard. Not that many people bought it, of course. It created the album mix, Stretch and Vern's Michael Lombard mix, and the I Hardly Part mix, neither of which are spectacular or amazing or necessary for you to hear. This CD features a great track called We Are the Boys that the band did play live occasionally, and that full-length version of The Fear. And Party Hard was inspired by the very idea of again, being at a party and realising you should have left 5 minutes ago. It's got a line in it which is, I see you having it, but now you've simply had it. The idea that you've gone too far. You've gone so far over the line you can't even see the line, to quote the immortal Joey Tribbiani from Friends, and you've just gone too far. It's possibly the closest thing, apart from Disco 2000, that Pulp have to a dance floor track, really. But it's a fiercely condemnatory lyric. The vocals are sung through a vocoder. The chorus doesn't really lift. Again, it doesn't change the story that the band have, which is these are difficult songs to love and difficult songs to like, and that's not going to help the band achieve the kind of commercial pressure and success that a £1 million video is going to place when it's breathing down your necks. Yes, I'm looking at you. This is hardcore with your not amazing video. With, what is it, Babies, which they shot with a shopping trolley and £30, is a much better video than This Is Hardcore, which cost £1 million. Necessity might be the mother of invention, but at the same point, money itself doesn't substitute for not having a great idea. As anybody that has seen any of the Snyderverse Superman movies can tell you. Track 3 is Help the Aged. Track 3 is... track 2 is Dishes. I've missed that completely. Oh, man. Sorry about that. Track 2 is Dishes. So it goes The Fear, Dishes, Party Hard, Help the Aged. And, Dishes is, again, a song about a third life crisis. As a song with, I'm not Jesus, but I have the same initials. I am the man who stays home and does the dishes. I think what Jarvis is trying to do is to write about a reality that he started to lose contact with. But also at the same point, it's about, the idea that you get to a certain point in your life and you realise that certain things, fame, fortune, etc., are just not going to happen for you. And, I had a realisation at a certain point. I could have tried harder. I could have made more of an effort. I could have taken more risks, made more love and been less afraid, as James sang on, I think Someone's Got It In For Me. But I didn't. And ultimately, we have to live with the knowledge that we might just be pretty ordinary people. And actually being ordinary is not a bad thing at all, in the slightest. But yeah, having a song which effectively goes, I am not Jesus, but I have the same initials. I am the man that stays home and does the dishes. That is a strange lyric. And for example, it's a song about just being a boring middle-aged dude. And you need more songs about that, really. I think me being a boring middle-aged dude, at least I know I am. I'm not under any illusions about that. Obviously, you've got Help the Aged, and This Is Hardcore. So, yeah, The Fear, Dishes, Party Hard, Help the Aged, This Is Hardcore. That's a pretty kind of powerful, kind of 5-line kind of whack that you've got there. And it's by the time that you get to, I think, TV Movie, track 6, and you start to go, yeah, the pulp of the bright day glow kind of outfits and the spinning disco balls and stuff, they're not coming back. That man's gone. Or as what his name says in, as Danny says in The Shining, Danny's not here, Mrs. Torrance. Pulp's not here, pop pickers. Pulp's gone somewhere else. And you've got TV Movie. And TV Movie is about sitting at home and watching television, and it's kind of a breakup song. In fact, the whole thing is kind of a breakup LP, and you can kind of listen to it, the album as a whole, and you can kind of go, yeah, this is legacy. This is hangover territory. This is kind of like a reaction album. And many bands have a reaction album, and some are bad, and some of them are amazing. And Def Leppard made Slang in 1996, an album where they suddenly wanted to convince you that they always liked wearing jeans and being, angry truckers. And you're kind of going, you're just cosplaying, really, aren't you? You're just a glam metal pop band. That's what you always were. TV Movie kind of picks up the knowledge that whatever was bright and sparkling, they've seen you having it, and now you've just had it, and it's starting to go. Track 7 is A Little Soul, third single from the LP. Made number 22 in the pop charts. It's about a person that's become an absent father by choice, that's had children and decided to walk away from the responsibility of it. So you can see that, the cover photo there is effectively the same person taken from two slightly different angles a few seconds later. But it is, the representation of a form of masculinity that perhaps presents a certain thing but isn't actually that thing. So it's also the same person that's giving us, the evil eye here on the gatefold sleeve to the LP. This is Hardcore. It's about an absent dad by choice, and it was written by Jarvis over one weekend. In fact, it addressed a number of factors. For example, fathers that are either absent or abandon their children. The idea of going, was I wanted? Was I just, like an accident, a mistake? And what will that do to someone's ego to say to them, actually, your dad didn't want you, or you've been deliberately abandoned by your parents? And personally, I take fatherhood and parenthood very, very seriously. It's a massive commitment, and it's a great honour and a privilege to help somebody become a person, to protect them into adulthood, to help shape and share their world, and to be a friend when perhaps they don't have anyone, and to kind of guide them along the way to being basically a lovely human being. Not everybody takes parenthood that seriously, and some people are definitely negligent and irresponsible in their actions. I take it quite seriously, and right now, if I really wanted to, I could text my kids, and they'd probably ignore me because they'd be playing on the Xbox in the room over there, or possibly playing on the Xbox in a room a few miles that way. But at least then, I've got the option, and they've got the option. Whereas if you walk out and all contact is severed, you don't get that option. That's a decision that suddenly people, when they get to 30, will be looking at and going, did my dad ever want me? Well, why am I here? What am I doing? And to quote well-known kind of psychologist speak, damaged people damage people. And if you've got a situation where you're like that, you can end up kind of having no realistic kind of father figure, and you can have a distorted view of what a good kind of male role model might be, or how it's appropriate to behave around people, and then you kind of perpetuate the cycle of cruelty and harm which can happen to people. And all of that is built on a song that is built on a sample from Tracks of My Tears that is then replaced at the last minute with a similar sounding but not syllable guitar line. And the third single from the album, that line, you look like me, but you don't act like me. You don't even want to know me, etc. And it's just about, what? Who am I? And parenthood is a thing that people don't really write about. And it's something that I think maybe Brett Anderson has spoken about and talked about a few times, and written in some of the songs in swathes, songs like, like Kids, No Tomorrow, the Night Thoughts album particularly, elements of the Blue Hour album, is talking about fatherhood and the responsibility that comes with that quite articulately, in a way that, and this is something that, by the way, I absolutely love in bands that I love, is that they help me on my journey through life, and they provide insight and views to things which I perhaps wouldn't necessarily easily have the answers to. And I've said this many, many times on the NOTCAST, is, to me, music was a map that showed me where I was in the world when I otherwise felt lost. And songs like A Little Soul, and songs like, swathes like Kids and No Tomorrow, etc., really kind of, even to this day, aren't songs about then. They're songs that I relate to now. And it's important, because without being able to relate to something now, the longevity just isn't going to stick, is it? The track after, TV Movie and A Little Soul, is I'm a Man. It's got the most obvious chorus of the album, but again, it's a song about the concept of masculinity, revisiting the concept that's seen a little bit in misshapes as well, and kind of taking a different approach to what's happening in there. It's kind of talking about what it is to be a man, and to how it is. And I just quickly looked through the lyrics to I'm a Man, and it's like, your car can get up to 110, you've got nowhere to go, but you'll get there again and again, and nothing ever makes no difference to a man. It's the idea of going, well, what is it to be a man? And again, that follows on from the theme that's in A Little Soul, and to an extent, a TV movie, and a little bit of This Is Hardcore, kind of like a conversation around sexuality, masculinity, manhood, responsibility. What is it to wake up in the morning and realise you've got to go to work, or you've got to go and, make the kids breakfast, etc. Those type of things. The next track after it is Seductive Barry, which is, I think, probably, they had a working title, but they never got a better title for it. Although originally, I think it had working titles of Love Scenes and Sex Symbol. It's about what happens when a fantasy becomes a reality. What happens when you get to the moment where you've talked about it and now you're facing the reality of what it actually is. And is the seduction, is it all seduction and no actual realisation? How does that work? That's a curious thing. And as an album, the whole album, This Is Hardcore, it kind of presents a mood around reality, and a mood about, or a theme around kind of all these kind of themes around masculinity, sexuality, responsibility, legacy, in a way that perhaps when you looked at it and listened to it to start off with, you wouldn't necessarily think that. Next track is Sylvia. Got a great chorus, but like most songs written after women's names, not necessarily perhaps the most obvious of songs around it. It's okay. I don't remember much about Sylvia, but the last two, these are really kind of songs which you've got to go and are, in my opinion, up there with the best of the best from Pulp. Glory Days, although it is a song that sounds like it could be Common People Part 2, and very clearly in many respects absolutely is. It has one of the finest lyrics. It's about, when I've seen how big the world is, do you expect me to clean toilets? I remember a partner of mine had a CD that they'd written, and they'd written out the lyrics to Glory Days in this circle that went in like that, and I go, wow, that is, it still sticks with me as just reminding them, this is how important that song is to that person. Is about, the glory days that you've got, when mankind's gone to the future, and there's a lyric around, we were brought up on the space race and now they expect you to clean toilets, and when you've seen how big the world is, can you make do with this? And it's like, yeah, absolutely. We were all taught we could be this, we could be that, and yet when the reality comes to it, we're just people. I'm not going to quote Hackerty Dog, not normal, innocent people at all, but just people, and we're just expected to just live with, no, that's not your path. The world that you were told you could have, that's not for you. As for other people, this is for somebody else. And it's then kind of quite a depressing thought that then comes up with The Day After Tomorrow, which is the next track. Well, the day after the revolution, the dust has settled, replaced the bulbs in the lights, a revolution happened, but nobody noticed. And about what happens after the revolution? Well, we still have work. We still have got, places to go and people to see and buses to catch and food to eat. And all you've really changed really is the branding that's on some of the things. You've still got, roads and government and all that. So even after the revolution, you thought the revolution might be the answer to solving your problems in whatever form that comes. And that could be MAGA, it could be Brexit, it could be anything. It says, but actually the core problems are still there. They're still the same. Haven't solved them. What are you going to do when you wake up in the morning after your golden sunset and the credits roll? Because there's always a day that happens after that. What happens at that point? And, well, frankly, it sounds like I'm telling you this is a very, very depressing album, and it isn't. What it is it's more realistic than depressing, and it's an album that kind of quite sensitively for the time. And remember, the 90s were a period of toxic masculinity, loaded laddism, sexism, rampant homophobia. I was trying to deal with these subjects around, who am I? And what's the point of life, and what's it all about, and trying to do so in a sensitive and articulate manner that could still sell 1 million copies. Of course it didn't. It sold 52,000 in week one. The last kind of voice that I think you'll hear on This Is Hardcore, apart from Jarvis going bye-bye, is a sample from a speech which is God called the expanse sky, from a religious broadcast that was found randomly while channel surfing. The idea of going, but this is actually quite an ambitious, quite big LP, And by the way, if you are going for various versions, the double LP version of it, the vinyl, has on the fourth side all the respective B-sides that are worth their tuppence, which, by the way, were originally on side 4 of the 1998 edition again, and that is replicated in the recent repressings, which is Tomorrow Never Lies, Laughing Boy, The Professional, and the End of the Line remix. This is Hardcore. And so we're going to pick those up because Tomorrow Never Lies, like a lot of bands in 1997, Pulp got a phone call. And that phone call was, would you like to do the theme for the next James Bond film? It's called Tomorrow Never Dies. And so therefore suddenly, and all the respective B-sides that you had for bands like Saint Etienne and I think, Pulp and some other bands, there was called things like Tomorrow Never Spies, Tomorrow Never Pies, Tomorrow Never Lies. And you all go, we all know it was called Tomorrow Never Dies, so don't bullshit us. It's a rejected Bond theme, and that's what Tomorrow Never Lies is. It's a rejected Bond theme. And the band were told on Wednesday that if they wanted to do the Bond theme, it had to be submitted to the office by Friday. Short notice, but they did it. And you ended up getting a pretty darn great B-side out of the process. There's also Laughing Boy, which is occasionally played live, but not particularly good, not particularly memorable. There's a track called The Professional, and The Professional, by the way, kind of picks up from the themes that are in the This Is Hardcore title track. It's about a response and callback to This Is Hardcore written from a slightly different perspective. It's a dark and grim lyric. It's not amazing. It's perfectly okay, but it shouldn't be on the album. And then you've got The End of the Line, which is effectively a minimal, ambient, somewhat orchestral reprise of some of the undertones and some of the secondary themes from This Is Hardcore, which works very, very well as almost a kind of like a fade out. So you think about when you go to a gig and the lights stop and it all comes up and you rush it out and there's a song that's playing, the end of the line is that song. It's kind of letting you know it's time to go home now. Other B-sides from around that time, by the way, on A Little Soul, we had Cocaine Socialism, which I've already discussed, and Like a Friend, which was originally written for a soundtrack of a film and sometimes is played live by the band. I think it was used in the film Great Expectations. If anybody remembers that, it's probably available on DVD from CEX for about 30 pence, by the way. And there was another track called That Boy's Evil, which is on CD too, of A Little Soul, which is by an act called The Chocolate Layers, which is basically Jarvis and Steve fucking about in the studio one night. We also have on the Party Hard single, we have We Are the Boys. And We Are the Boys was recorded for the soundtrack for the film Velvet Goldmine. And it's a banger. It's a huge, stompy, glammy thing with horns, played live by the band a number of times. Worked very well live, from what I remember, but I don't remember much because I only saw one show on the tour. Then in 2006... This Is Hardcore. Well, actually, later on in 1998, This Is Hardcore got a reissue, including a CD called This Is Glastonbury and a slightly less offensive sleeve. I prefer this sleeve, by the way, because it makes the point without being too graphic. This features an EP, 7 songs, recorded at the Glastonbury Festival in 1998, missing Glory Days and Common People, which are on the Japanese CD. By the way, for the devalued yen exportation currency exchange rate tracks. And when the band played live in 1998, they always ended shows with Glory Days and Common People as a medley together, which was thunderous and amazing, and I wish they'd play it live now. This is Glastonbury, is effectively Pulp's first live album, and to date, well, until the release of the second This Is Glastonbury, which has just been announced today, This Is Glastonbury is effectively the Pulp live album, and it's very hardcore centric because it features The Fear, Live Bed Show, TV Movie, Little Soul, Party Heart, Help the Aged, and Seductive Barry. And it features the longer version, by the way, of Live Bed Show that has the extended intro. Is it good? It's all right. It's not necessary, but it's all right. And the band toured in 1998. They toured a little bit, nowhere near as much as they once did, and they really, really should have done. I think they played something like 35 shows. They did European festivals. So you can imagine after spending 13, 14 years toiling away in absolute obscurity, suddenly then being able to sell 10,000 tickets a night, and then you suddenly have the opportunity to tour arenas. And what you do, you don't do it, do you? You play a set of festival shows one of which is here, recorded live at Lordy Festival in Germany, one of the first dates of the tour where, from what I remember, the equipment goes to Russia because it got stuck on the wrong flight. And Jarvis moans about how he's never been to Russia, but his equipment has, and his equipment won't appreciate it. That's a kind of like supplemental live album because there was lots of CD live releases around about that time. The band also headlined Finsbury Park and Glastonbury, so you've got Glastonbury in audio form on This Is Glastonbury, and this Ultimate Live, the Pulp Live DVD, which features also the Park Is Mine, recorded live at Finsbury Park, featuring the new lineup of the band: Richard Hawley on guitar, formerly of the Long Pigs, who is now a solo artist in his own right, effectively replacing Russell on guitar, Mark moving over to play guitar and no violin at all. But the Park Is Mine features 19 songs recorded at Finsbury Park in 1998. And with that, you think, after that period of time, the band haven't played the UK or Europe for 2.5 years. You do one set of festival shows, you do a small American tour, you disappear for 3 months, have a break, then you play Japan, Australia, and then you come back and play arenas in the UK. Effectively, Pulp fudged it by not playing live. They should have done a set of European shows, they should have done more shows, and they should have actually just got their face back out there, because effectively the idea was the entire of This Is Hardcore as a period in the public eye lasted 8 months, at which they played the UK and toured the UK once. I don't think they toured Europe, and they only played like festivals outdoors. So if you didn't see them play at 4 o'clock in the afternoon at a festival 100 miles from your house that you had to pay £80 to get into when you only wanted to see one band, you didn't see Pulp. So if you liked Pulp in 1996, you could easily be forgiven for thinking, well, they don't want me to be a fan because they're not playing anywhere near me. And then that was going to become a problem later on in the band's career. But yeah, the Park Is Mine is perfectly cromulent and accurate. And so the band's touring then, as I kind of quickly work out, they did US dates first in places like the 930 Club. They then played festivals in June and July. And for most countries, it was festivals or nothing. They played Glastonbury, which of course is on here. This is Glastonbury. Then they disappeared. And Glastonbury in 1998, it was muddy, it was rainy, it wasn't as good. That sense that Pulp were surfing the crest of a wave evaporated. They had they became the butt of a Stars in Their Eyes lookalike who came on stage and sang or co-sang The Fear on the arena tour, which the band thought presumably was quite funny, but everyone else just thought was a bit crass. And the idea of the absence. Some bands, the more absent they are, the more successful they get. Pulp took that for granted and took it too soon. They disappeared too soon, and they hadn't got their hold into the ground yet. The idea of the band, they played Japan in September, then November and December they played the UK, then they disappeared. They didn't do anything for ages. Compilation album appearances, such as, by the way, their fantastic cover version of All Time High, the theme tune from the ludicrously named Octopussy, the James Bond film, appeared in 1997, but they didn't even do things like that. They just kind of vanished off the face of the earth. The problem with This Is Hardcore, and there is a problem with it, is that the band didn't tour enough and they got stuck in remix hell. They thought too much. They were writing, playing together, reviewing the content, picking out chunks, rebuilding things like Brian Eno and James did. They had decision paralysis. Jarvis and Steve started making more decisions. The urgency had gone. The band's hunger had gone. They had effectively kind of not abdicated, but they'd realised that they had to make a leap of faith and they weren't necessarily ready to do it. And then they disappeared. And that meant that the things that some bands have, when you spend all your life waiting to get to a certain point and then suddenly you're there, is that at the point when they had the open goal in front of them to really stick the landing, creatively, I think they succeeded and they made a great LP, but it wasn't the best album of the year. It was an album that was out of time and therefore timeless. It was the album of the year, but the year was probably 2001 or maybe 2017, because This Is Hardcore did not resonate with people at the time. The band went from playing multiple nights and headlining Birmingham NEC like that to selling 4,000 tickets and having the back curtain cut off, whereas if they'd have gone on a 10-date theatre tour playing to 3,000 people a night, you know damn well they would have sold every ticket, but they didn't do it. They thought they were still an arena band, and they just fudged the landing. And that is where we are with This Is Hardcore, which, by the way, is a great album, and I strongly recommend it. It has aged magnificently, but it is not the follow-up that they or the world or the record company really wanted. Now, in 2006, there was a deluxe edition. There was no Pulp. Jarvis didn't release anything until the 20th of December 2006. But there was a deluxe edition of This Is Hardcore, which contained the B-sides, of course, but also a proper version of Cocaine Socialism, because a rough mix was the one that was issued. A track called It's a Dirty World, a rough mix of Tomorrow Never Dies, and then demos of, now I can't believe this one's called Can I Have My Balls Back, Please? Modern Marriage, My Erection, You Are the One, and Street Operator. And Can I Have My Balls Back, Modern Marriage, and My Erection have some very, very unusual titles indeed. But it kind of indicates where the album was at the time. It was being forged out of a vision of discussions about masculinity, sexuality, identity, responsibility. And to some people, that sounded miserable, whereas they wanted the upbeat Disco 2000 Pulp. And I can't blame them, because that sometimes people listen to music to remind them of who they used to be and what they used to be, as opposed to where they are now. Me, I like to listen to stuff that tells me about where I am now, which is obviously a middle-aged man talking to his mobile phone about records he likes, loves, or merely owns. And that is Pulp's This Is Hardcore, an album that has aged far better than its initial critical and commercial reception would tell you. I love Pulp, as you've probably worked out. I have many things to say about Pulp. And This Is Hardcore is an album that, with a slightly different cover, and perhaps having come out at a slightly different time in many people's lives, would have been received far, far better than it actually was. But it is an album that I rate highly, and I hope that by watching this, you will then start to have an appreciation for it that perhaps didn't happen at the time, and that is okay. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. Be excellent to each other, as Bill and Ted said. And I will see you all, hopefully, soon. Some of you in person when I come to gigs, and some of you on a screen or in the comments box. So, see you all soon. And take care of yourselves, because there's nobody else that will. Right. I can't think of any other way to wrap up. So I'm just going to press the button, press stop, and end it. Or actually, as Jarvis sings, in the last seconds of the day after the revolution, bye-bye.